All right, I think I can go ahead and get started. So this is a developer's guide to advertising. Specifically from the perspective of websites that make money from advertising. So the supply side, not really the demand side, the people advertising things to you. So first, just a little bit about me. I'm primarily a back-end developer at Andrews McMeel Universal. I work primarily with Ruby on Rails, but I also work a lot with our advertising and analytics implementations, which means I work with JavaScript. I'm not like a super amazing bleeding edge JavaScript developer, but it works, it gets things done, we make money. So a few things I like: lifting heavy stuff. This is a picture for me last year in my first strongman competition. It's a lot of fun. Looks cooler than it is. Like, it looks like I'm lifting a lot. I'm not. Cute animals, good dessert. And then I put my GitHub and Twitter up there. I'll have these slides up and I'll tweet them out after the talk. All right, so I'm going to try to cover why you should care about advertising. It's maybe not the most exciting thing to people, but I think that there's a lot of benefit in developers and technical people caring about it. We'll go over some basic vocabulary, and then kind of the main focus, what I know the most about, programmatic advertising, specifically header bidding, some useful tools, and then some misconceptions and like the problems behind them. And then I've got a few resources and kind of like final thoughts, Q&A. Okay, so why should you care about advertising? Does anybody here work on sites that make money from advertising? Like, you have, okay. Ads kind of suck. I mean, we're all familiar with like these weird, kind of sketchy, clickbaity ads. I'm sure you guys have experienced like redirect ads. So it's not all bad, but like this kind of stuff makes you just feel like why do we do this? So a lot of people complain. In my experience, in particular, technical people tend to have like much more of a problem with advertising than just like regular users. There's privacy issues, there's user experience issues, there's performance issues. But to me, I don't think we can begin solving those problems if developers aren't interested and invested. Like, we think about these things all the time, so we're kind of in the best position to like work with other people, share that knowledge, and start to change things. So what I feel like happens right now is like, you've got an ad ops team somewhere, like off separate. They like send a request. It's kind of like throwing it over the fence, like, put this code on the page. And then we as developers grumble about it. Ad ops doesn't understand anything, like, this code sucks. We put it on the page, move on, don't really think about it. And ad ops is often probably kind of intimidated. They don't necessarily want to like come talk to us, but it doesn't have to be this way. So yeah, ad ops doesn't really know a lot about the technical side of how websites work, how code loads, the consequences of performance issues, security, that kind of stuff. But they do know how ads work, which is actually very complicated. And as developers, we know a lot of the other stuff, but we don't understand ad ops, which is fine. Like, that's why we have different people doing these things. So what I think, and why I think this is important, is that we can come together, understand ad ops goals, limitations, challenges, and also get them thinking more about things like performance, because those things have revenue impacts. It's just nobody has necessarily like quantified that to them and enabled them to test. So come together, work on it. And like, it's not always going to be perfect, but you can come to compromises that make things less terrible for the user, but also still make you money. Can also just kind of help avoid these pitfalls of like, oh, you just put the code on the page and it just works, it's great. Which I think developers know is like usually not the case. Or when people are pitching solutions, you can be there to be like, that's not actually true. Which is, I do a lot of that for our ad ops team, just trying to evaluate, like, is this thing actually even gonna work? Should we pay for it? So, getting into vocabulary. There's a ton of vocabulary. It's kind of overwhelming. It's not always used in the same way, and there's always new stuff popping up. So I'm not gonna hit everything, I'm just gonna hit what I think are some important terms that you might come across. But the kind of important thing to take away from this is that if you are working with an ad ops team or you like wanna work in this area, you'll kind of want to establish a shared base vocabulary and what you guys are gonna agree that those words mean. Otherwise, it gets really hard to get anything done. So, ad inventory. A lot of this stuff kind of follows like a bid, auction, sales type language. So these are basically just the ad spaces available on a site for advertising to be sold. As an example, these two purple spaces are reserved for advertisings on one of our sites. So it's not just the space, but also like what sizes. And I mean, I just happen to know that at this screen size, that rectangle over there, it can be a square like that, 300 by 250, but it can also be taller, like a 160 by 600, 300 by 600. And the top one, 728 by 90, 970 by 90. So just a representation of what's available, what sizes. So an ad impression, it's a little bit like the page view of the ad world. It's counted when an ad is successfully served or downloaded to the page for display. Now, if the code makes it to the page, it's usually counted. It can vary from vendor to vendor, product to product, but if something goes wrong with the code and the ad doesn't display, if it's downloaded, the impression's usually still counted. So ad server. In general, this is a tool that's used to manage, serve, track various metrics about the ads that serve. There's a bunch of different kinds, but I think most people would be familiar with Google's DoubleClick. They actually call it Google Ad Manager now. There's usually code on your page to interact with the ad server. So an ad exchange is a digital marketplace where various different advertisers that participate in the exchange can bid on ad inventory from various publishers, aka different sites. Again, more code on the page usually to interact with ad exchanges. These I'm not going to go super in depth, but you will see them. SSP, DSP, more technology in the ecosystem. Supply side platform, which is the publisher, like the website side, the people selling. And then demand side, it's the advertisers, the people buying. So viewability. This has become a pretty big thing over the past 2.5 years. It's basically a metric for trying to see, did this advertising impression have a chance to be seen, get in front of somebody's eyeballs? And the way we're measuring that was at least 50% of the ad in view for the user for at least 2 seconds. And this is surprisingly difficult to achieve. Like 100%, I mean, the web code doesn't always work, so that's not possible, but it's actually kind of hard to get into like the 70 and 80% range as well. As an example, like these two green ones right now, if we're here for 2 seconds, those are considered viewable. However, if I load this page and like scroll down immediately, that ad at the top would not be considered viewable even though it's there. The ad at the side actually locks, which means it should have close to like 80 or 90% viewability, like overall the page views. Above the fold, below the fold, this is kind of an older term and it like doesn't make as much sense given that a lot of websites are responsive now. But it's again just like above the fold, on page load is the ad in that viewable portion of the screen. And then below the fold is the part that you can't see yet. But you'll still see this. And then CPM, this is just a way we talk about revenue pretty commonly, and it means cost per thousand. And that's the price paid for every 1,000 ad impressions on a site. All right, so what is programmatic advertising? It's basically just the automation of buying and selling ads using a ton of data, various algorithms to make decisions. It's kind of an overarching category. It covers a bunch of different techniques, including header bidding. There's also like direct, indirect, real-time bidding. It's a lot, but basically just automated buying and selling. This wasn't as important in the past because people still had more direct relationships where you actually work like in person. I have these spots on my site. Do you want to buy them? And then like negotiating terms. And then you just kind of take your leftovers and just programmatically let people buy them. It's not as much the case anymore. Like programmatic's a pretty big deal. A lot of sites use this and make a good portion, if not most of their money from it. So what is header bidding? Header bidding is like a subset or a programmatic technique where your ad inventory is bid on by multiple different ad exchanges at the same time. This can be client-side, which means all of those auctions happen in the user's browser. Like, as the site loads, several requests are sent out, various auctions happen, information comes back. Or it can be server to server, where all your connections are in the cloud with whatever platform you're using. You send one request out, and then all the auctions happen on that server. Everything comes back. There's pros and cons to either one of these, and it kind of depends on your specific site, which one you might use. So how does it work? And this image came from the IAB and Rubicon, which is an ad exchange. And it's pretty simplified, but the basic idea is the user comes to your site in their browser. Your page starts to load. Your ad code starts executing. And I'm going to describe client side. So ad code starts executing. We send out requests to all of the ad exchanges telling them, here's the inventory I have, here's the sizes, how much are you willing to pay to put your ad in here? So they all run their own auctions because they're also connected up to several different people. And then those winning bids all come back. Your wrapper aggregates them. Sometimes it just takes the top bid, sometimes it sends all of them, but it wraps them up and sends them out to your ad server. And your ad server is responsible for figuring out, okay, who won, what am I supposed to serve, and sends that back to the browser. And then the ad renders. I kind of skipped over the SSPs and DSPs because that stuff usually, it's already connected up. There's not a lot you do with code generally to impact any of that, but it does happen behind the scenes. There's a huge chain of technology all connected together, which I'll touch on later. Okay, so useful tools. There's a lot. I mean, one of the most obvious is you're going to need a wrapper, or you're going to need some sort of server-to-server solution. I actually I started working with advertising in the time before wrappers were really a thing, when header bidding was first starting. And so it was basically like, oh, you want to work with us? Here's a tag, put it on your page. But the tags often kind of assumed that they were the only tag on the page, which means as soon as you tried to add more, you're getting conflicts because a lot of them were synchronous, a lot of them tied into functionality with your ad server code and stopped other things from working. It got complicated really fast. So a wrapper handles a lot of that logic for you, getting everybody to work together using a shared language about your ad inventory, not holding the page load up. So this has simplified things a lot. I personally use Prebid. It's open source, well-maintained, got good documentation and examples, and a decent-sized community, which has been really important. But we do have development resources to implement ourselves. Not everybody does. So some ad exchanges have proprietary wrappers that you can use that may require less development time. Index Exchange is one that I know of for sure, but there are others. And in exchange for that, you may also get more support from them. So that could be a good option depending on resources available to you. And then there's server-to-server. Amazon has one. Prebid also has a server-to-server option. This is a little more simple because it's usually like your ad server code and then your server-to-server solution. And that's kind of it. Anytime you want to add a new ad exchange or take somebody out, you do that all like in an interface somewhere else. It doesn't require code updates typically. So that can be really useful if you really don't have development time and maybe your ad ops team wants the flexibility to add things quickly. There's some debate about like, you may make less money with server to server, you may not, it depends. So it also might be worth testing out. So DevTools, this is another big one. When I first started, I mean, this is still kind of the case, but there wasn't a lot of like documentation. And like as a developer, I'm used to being able to, if I don't know how to do something, usually I can Google it and find somebody who's done something similar, or at least some like small trail, like a place to start. And this was not the case for the technical side of advertising. So when I first started out, I basically was just using the DevTools and looking at, okay, well, what's this ad code doing? I'd like download the source code, poke through it, try to see like what network requests are going out. And then I also look at other publishers' websites and be like, okay, well, what are they doing? So that was primarily the way that I came to understand how all this stuff's connected together. Now it's mostly good for debugging, testing different things. I use the network tab a ton to see like, am I sending out all of my bid requests or am I like missing somebody? Have I broken something? And is all the information that I need to send to them getting to them? And are they sending me anything back or are we getting errors? And you can see a lot of that in like the header and response parts in your network tab. The application tab, I mostly use this for looking at cookie values and sometimes like manipulating or deleting certain cookies. Elements, you can dive deep into like the actual ad iframe on your page and see what's loaded. And sometimes if you get familiar with the different domains, you can kind of tell who it's coming from. So if it's a gross or block list violating ad, like it's got something inappropriate like nudity, you can sometimes quickly track down, this is who it is, this is like the identifying ID, and get them to block it and take it down. And good old console, great for debugging, seeing what's going on, seeing who is causing like 50 or more errors at once. So I use DevTools pretty much every day. And this was just an example of like, this is one of the ad requests, and where I'm usually looking is here because this is all of that bid response information that I'm sending to the server. So this is something I look at a lot to be like, okay, well, what are the bids? Are they all attached? Does it look okay? And then this, again, is like, I've opened up the ad iframe, and I can kind of see like what resources are loading and where it's coming from. I think this one is a Google ad specifically, but you get more familiar with what the different markup looks over time. And then this is kind of disappointing. When you look at the network tab and see all the requests that are coming from one ad, just back and forth, like you'll have multiple copies of like jQuery or other common libraries, several pixels that all measure the same exact thing. And sometimes you can get somebody to do something about that, sometimes you can't. Performance testing. So the performance tab in DevTools is good for getting like a quick view, but sometimes because the ads are programmatic and they change, you kind of will want an aggregate view of what's going on. So sometimes I'll run things through webpagetest.org because you can run multiple tests and then analyze the results all together. GTmetrix or Pingdom tools can also work. And then there's a request map generator, which will let you see sort of a graph of all of the requests, starting with your site and all of the resources that it requests, and then for those, all of the ones that they request, and so on. With ads, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. This is obviously not super readable, but if you know somebody in particular tends to be a problem, you can kind of dive deep and find out, okay, well, who all are they requesting and what's going on? So ad quality, this is a big one. So how do we stop those terrible ads, the redirects, things like that? Well, unfortunately, you can't stop all of them, but there are tools to help mitigate this stuff. Something that we pay for on our side is ad scanning and blocking. There's a bunch of different companies that do this. We use Confient, but basically they scan the ad creatives in real time, and based on known threats or certain indicators, they try to block redirects or like ads coming from known dangerous or spammy URLs. You can also block based on performance and requests, but that kind of requires being pretty confident you know like what's a reasonable threshold, which can be kind of hard to pin down. We also have report this ad links at the bottom of all of our ads, which is useful if a user sees something, they can click on the link, report it, and it pulls all the ad information. So you know what served, where it came from. It'll usually take a screenshot of what was there. So this also helps us catch stuff. Sometimes bad ads, sometimes just stuff that violates our block list, like on our comic site, we don't do ads for alcohol. And that's set up with all of our advertisers, but stuff still gets through. And then Charles or Fiddler, which are web debugging proxies, good for tracking down the redirects. Now, it's kind of hard to simulate the redirects or make them happen, but using Charles or Fiddler and a mobile hotspot or two phones, one to serve as a mobile hotspot, one to serve as your guinea pig phone, basically, you can hook them up and keep track of everything that happened so that you can trace, okay, well, before I got redirected, what loaded and who was it that redirected me? This doesn't always work, but this is one of the most reliable ways to track down a redirect when it's happening and quickly shut it down. Browser extensions, pretty helpful. These are some of the ones that I use. I've got pretty much all of the ad blockers installed on various browsers just because it's helpful to see like what's happening and how they work. I've got a cookie modifier which is just faster than using the dev tools to do it. User agent switcher, also pretty helpful. And then there's a couple ad-specific ones. Ad Wizard in particular is a really quick way to see for the ads on the page various information like where they came from, what the bids were, things like that. And then Viewability Monitor is just a nice visualization as you're actually going through your site to see when certain ads become viewable. And then various other tools. These are kind of things that are nice to implement. Support for A/B testing. And that can be A/B testing of ad code or just the ability to A/B test adding different partners, seeing who makes the page slower, who makes you more money, things like that. Static testing pages for testing new tags and seeing what they do and what they load. A test mode. So some way to force your ad server to serve a specific ad so you can see what it looks like, how it behaves. Because a lot of these things, if you just load them locally, they either won't do anything or you kind of get like these placeholder ads, which doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you if the ad is slow or if it's loading really weird code. So that can be helpful. At some point, especially if you're doing this yourself, you will probably want an ad server configuration generator. For DFP, there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to generate in order for header bidding to work. It's like multiple thousands of different configurations, stuff you couldn't do by hand. There's a few things out there on GitHub which may or may not work for your particular situation, but they offer various libraries for their API. I thought it was going to be super hard. It's actually not that bad because they have plenty of examples. And then you'll want an easy way to analyze the particular configuration there on the page. And then lazy loading and ad refresh are a pretty big deal, especially since viewability is important. Luckily, Intersection Observer has pretty good browser support now, especially with the polyfill, and it makes it super easy. I think it's like, maybe 10 lines of code for me to lazy load our ads. Okay, so misconceptions and some of the problems behind them that I feel like people don't always necessarily know about. So I've seen this in forums. People want to know, like, well, why are they asking me to turn my ad blocker off anyway? I never click on ads, so they're not going to make money from me anyway. Why would it matter? Well, it's not all about clicks. People do still buy on clicks, but what matters a lot of the time is, did the ad load? Was it viewable? So just by letting the ads display, you are helping the site make money. Which I'm not saying you shouldn't use an ad blocker. I'm just saying this is why the site will still make money. And they would like to make money to help support the maintenance of that site, the content, things like that. However, I can understand why you would use an ad blocker. I use an ad blocker on a case-by-case basis. So why don't sites just stop serving those sketchy redirect ads? Why would anybody think it was okay to make money from those? Well, people don't. They get through like anything else. They tend to pretend to be other ads. They pretend to be other domains. They get through various scanning tools by acting one way when they think that they're being scanned and acting a completely different way when they actually serve to the user. They're hard to track down. They're constantly changing. Like I said, we pay for scanning, and then the ad server and all of the ad exchanges, they also scan on their end, and stuff still manages to get through. So it's a difficult problem to solve, basically. It kind of feels like a game of cat and mouse. People constantly going back and forth trying to figure out how to stop it, and then other people getting around everything. So why can't sites let me choose what advertisers I want to see and which ones I don't? And that's mostly because the ecosystem is absurdly complicated. This is from a few years ago. And so things have changed a lot since then, grown, really. But like, this is just some of the various companies and technologies involved in the ecosystem. And it's hard to keep track of. Like, you may only have direct relationships with, let's say 5 different companies or so. But those companies have connections with a number of other companies and technologies that they need to do their work. And then there's the fact that many ad exchanges buy from each other. So maybe you work with OpenX directly, so you have code for them on your page. But maybe OpenX buys through another exchange that you also have on your page. So it all gets really tangled and complicated pretty quickly. So it would be easy to let you manage the more direct relationships, but because you don't necessarily know who else is going to load on your page, it quickly becomes pretty overwhelming. And I think that all of the stuff around GDPR has made this a lot more apparent. If you've looked at any of the, do you consent to the use of cookies on this site, and sometimes they'll have a button you can click on that will list categories, and then within those categories you'll see like huge lists of companies. That's not, I don't know anybody who can process that in a meaningful way. Like, what are users gonna do with that? And I feel like a lot of people just end up clicking, sure. Which isn't, I don't feel like that solves the problem we were trying to solve, which is to like give people more control over their data and their privacy. I don't feel like it follows the spirit of what was trying to be accomplished. And I think a lot of that is because the ad ecosystem is really difficult, which is maybe another problem that could be solved by having more developers who care and are involved to kind of try to push for changes that make these things easier to do. There's also the fact that like nobody was really prepared, like at all. So we would contact the people we work with because we were like, we want to be GDPR compliant, but we need you to have a solution ready so we can work with you. And a lot of people were like, oh, we're just going to wait and see what other companies do. Which isn't very helpful, especially if you make a lot of your money off of ads, because your option is risk getting a fine and not being compliant, or take all your ads off and lose money, or kind of both of those, which is we'll just block all EU traffic, which isn't great. Like, why are we blocking people from information that's meant to be out there and to be shared? It's kind of a mess. It's not in a great place now either, I don't think. I think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. So, some resources. The AdOps subreddit in Slack is really helpful. You've got AdOps people, but they also have a good number of really great devs who've been super helpful in figuring out how to do really complicated things. There's the pre-bid documentation, Google documentation, IAB, which is the International Advertising Bureau. They set a lot of standards. And then for news, I try to follow several different news sources just to kind of keep up with what's coming and what people are saying. You kind of have to take some of it with a grain of salt, especially when it comes to the technical stuff. There aren't a lot of people out there writing great resources that really understand the technical side, but Digiday, Ad Exchanger, Adweek, Happens in AdOps is great. Sign up for the newsletter if you can, but also just for the memes. All of the memes that I have are ones that I got from them. They're pretty funny, especially if you are working in AdOps, kind of like somebody else gets it. And then Google Publisher U is just a great way to understand more of the AdOps side, and if they work with DFP, how DFP works, which can be helpful just in making that connection yourself and like, oh, this is how all of this stuff connects together and then ties back to the code that I'm writing. Okay, so basically this is a pretty complicated space, and I think without developer involvement, I don't think that anything's going to change. Like, I think we'll still get sites that have not pop-ups, but the next version of pop-ups, those ads that pop up when they think you're trying to leave the site, ads that autoplay sound, stuff like that. You'll continue to have ads that negatively impact user experience, and I really don't think it has to be that way. I think with developer involvement, you can figure out, okay, maybe we can make a design that still shows the content, is easy to use, and puts the ads in a place where they can be viewable. Maybe we can reduce the number of ads. I think by coming at it from the perspective of, I understand what you're trying to do, and here's some ideas that I think can be good for the user and good for revenue, I think you're more likely to be heard rather than just saying ads are bad and we shouldn't have them, because nobody's going to go for that, basically. Okay, so again, this is my GitHub and Twitter. I'll tweet out the slides, and I'll have a summary of some of my notes and additional reading that I'll tweet out later. And then if you have any questions, I can also talk more privately afterwards. And you can also reach out to me on Twitter. I'm happy to share code, ideas, look at what you're doing, tell you if you're on the right track, anything like that. Great, I think that's it.